13 Environment and Development. Contents 13.1 Introduction, 13.2 Ecology and Sustainable Development, 13.3 Environmental Concerns and Contemporary Social Theory, 13.4 Consequences of Development on Ecology and Environment, 13.5 Ecology, Movements and Survival, 13.6 Development Projects as Ecological Concern, 13.7 Internationalisation of Environment Concerns, 13.8 Participatory Approach for the Management of Natural Resources, 13.9 Conclusion, 13.10 Further Reading. Learning Objectives. This unit introduces you to the environmental and ecological issues of development by highlighting the relations among ecology, environment and development, consequences of development on ecology and environment, and concerns of the ecological movement. 13.1 Introduction. This unit introduces you with the relationship between ecology, environment and development. It begins with the discussion on the concepts and their development. It discusses the consequences of development on ecology and environment, the issue of degradation of environment, sociological pollution and destruction of forest are also discussed here. The major concern of ecological movement here also been discussed here. The last section of this unit deals with a few development projects that have raised alarm among the environmentalists all over the globe. 13.2 Ecology and Sustainable Development. The term sustainable development gained wide international currency in recent years with the growth of ecological understanding at local, national and international levels, not only among the communities and the movement but also among national states and governments. Ensuring environmental sustainability, the 7th Millennium Development Goal requires achieving sustainable development patterns and preserving the productive capacity of natural ecosystem for future generations. Till the beginning of the 1980s, in many countries of the world, ecology was not integrated as an essential element of development planning and therefore it was not seriously considered as a major issue. The economic expansion in the last century and half had alarming consequences for the global environment. Depletion of ozone layer, air pollution, loss of forest and biodiversity, extinctions of plant and animal species, loss of marine life, soil and water pollution have occurred at an alarming rate. On realizing the importance of environmental variation, problems created by them and their impact on human settlement, quality of life, development problems and changes in fertility, mortality and morbidity, the concept of ecology acquired prominence during the 1980s. It brought forth the realization that the ecosystem had to be protected for the betterment of life in general. Box 13.1 Ecology. The word ecology may be used as interchangeable with geographic environment, and consequently ecological studies are often limited to the study of direct effect of environment on the material culture of the people with simple technologies. Social ecology is likewise concerned not only with direct responses to environment where technology is unsophisticated, but also with the distribution and composition of groups necessary for the exploitation of natural resources. The indirect relationships which spring from this grouping and general conceptualization of the cosmos associated with the specific habitats. The recent period in human history contrasts with the previous in its strikingly high rates of resource utilization. Even expanding and intensifying industrial and agricultural production has generated increasing demand on the world's total stock and flow of resources. Development interventions aimed at commercialization of natural resources involve a major shift in the manner in which rights to resource are perceived and exercised. The resource demand of development has led to the narrowing of the natural resource based for the survival of economically poor and powerless, either by direct transfer of resources away from their basic needs or by destruction of essential ecological process that ensures renewability of the life-supporting natural resources. The development to the sustainable, it must take into account the social, cultural, ecological, as well as economic factors of the living and non-living resource base, and the long-term as well as short-term advantages and disadvantages. A sustainable development. Brundtland Commission in its report defines sustainable development as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. It contains within it two key concepts. The concept of need, in particular, is the essential need of the world's poor to which overriding priority should be given, and the idea of limitation imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environmental ability to meet present and future needs. Thus, the goal of economic and social development must be defined in terms of sustainability in all countries, developed and developing, market-oriented or centrally planned. Interpretations will vary but must share certain general features and must follow from a consensus on the basic concept of sustainable development and on a broad strategic framework for achieving it. Development involves a progressive transformation of economy and society. A development path that is sustainable in a physical sense could theoretically be pursued even in a rigid social and political setting. But physical sustainability cannot be secured unless development policies pay attention to such a consideration as changes in access to resources and in the distribution of cost and benefits. B. Colonial domination over natural resource. For centuries, vital natural resources like land, water, and forest had been controlled and used collectively by village communities, thus ensuring a sustainable use of these renewable resources. The first radical change in resource control and the emergence of major conflicts over natural resources induced by non-local factors was associated with colonial domination of this part of the world. Colonial domination systematically transformed the common vital resources into commodities for generating profits and growth in revenues. The first industrial revolution was to a large extent supported by this transformation of commons into commodities, which permitted European industries access to the resources of South Africa. The transformation of commons into commodities have two implications. First, it deprived the politically weaker groups of their right to survival, which they had through access to commons. Second, it robs from nature its rights to self-renewal and sustainability by eliminating the social constraint on resource use that are the basics of common property management. With the collapse of international colonial structure and the establishment of sovereign countries in the region, these international conflicts over natural resources was expected to be reduced and replaced by resource policies guided by comprehensive national interest. However, resource use policies continued along the colonial pattern, and in the recent past, the second drastic change in the resource use has been initiated to meet the international requirements and the demands of the elites in the third world, leading to yet another acute conflict among diverse interests. The most seriously threatened interest in this conflict appears to be that of the politically weak and socially disorganized group whose resource requirements are minimal and whose survival is primarily dependent directly on the products of nature outside the market system. Recent changes in resource utilization have almost wholly bypassed the survival needs of these groups. These changes are primarily guided by the requirements of the countries of the north and of the elites of the south. Reflections and actions. 13.1. How do you think the increase in consumption affected the process of development? C. Expansion of global market phase. The development as an ideology allowed the indirect entry of global market domination. It creates the need for international aid and foreign debt, which provided the capital for such development projects that commercialize or privatize resources. Local resources thus increasingly move out of control of local communities and even national governments into the hands of international financial institutions. Forestry projects, dam projects, and fisheries projects ties the resources of the remotest village to international investment and aid. Multilateral development agencies such as World Bank give loan for environmentally sensitive areas like agriculture, forestry, and irrigation, and through these loans give primacy to the market economy and render nature's economy and survival economy as indispensable. The condition for the loan determine the mode of utilization of natural resources. The rates of return of investment in irrigation projects create an imperative for cash crop cultivation and wastage of water, even though it leaves the land waterlogged on an arid desert. Through internationally financed development projects, conflicts over natural resources pit tribal and peasant communities against international institutions, with the state acting as an agent of dispossession of local communities to clear the way for global plans and ideologies of development. Integration with the global market economy thus marginalizes the concern for the nature's economy and the survival economy. The massive involvement of international finance in the economic development of third world countries changes the natural resource management strategies in drastic way. Rapid growth of export-oriented resource utilization has led countries to the debt trap with its concomitant ecological degradation. Box 13.1 Chernobyl catastrophe. On April 26, 1986, in the Kiev region, Ukraine, 12 kilometers from the Belarusian border, a catastrophe occurred, the major breakdown of a power unit at the Chernobyl nuclear power station. By its scale, complexity to long-term consequence, it is the most severe catastrophe in the entire world history of atomic energy use. As a result of the explosion of the failed reactor, huge amount of radioactive substances were emitted to the atmosphere. The accident has left its radioactive fallout trace of 23% of the territory of Belarus. 3,778 settlements with more than 2 million people have resided therein, or 4.8% of the territory of Ukraine and 0.5% territory of Russia. After Chernobyl accident, Belarus became a zone of ecological disaster. The situation got worse since the newly emerged area of radioactive contamination coincided with the formerly existing area of high chemical pollution. The area of agricultural lands contaminated with radioactive cesium-137 with a very high density constitutes 1,600,000 hectares. 1,685,000 hectares of the forest in Belarus are contaminated with radioactive elements. The catastrophe has affected the destinies of millions of Belarusians. The radioactivity contamination of the ecosystem will stifle normal agriculture production and forestry for many decades. 13.3 Environmental concerns and contemporary social theory. The more recent concerns of the causes and consequences of the present ecological crisis are significant to modern social theory. The relations between human beings and the nature and the deleterious effects of human action upon later, a hitherto neglected area has emerged as a major issue. Another important issue of contemporary theory is the growth of environmental politics, movements which pose a challenge to the modern industrial capitalist mode of production and consumption, which are essentially environmentally destructive. Anthony Giddens in his later works attributes environmental problems to the modern industrial societies and the industrial sectors in the developing countries. Whatever the origin of the crisis, the modern industry, shaped by the combination of science and technology, is responsible for the greatest transformations of the world of nature than ever before. Ulrich Beck distinguishes the modern society from the earlier ones as the risk society, characterized by its catastrophic potential resulting from environmental deterioration. In the pre-industrial societies, risks resulting from natural hazards occurred and by their very character could not be attributed to voluntary decision making. The nature of risk changed in industrial societies, industrial risk and accidents at work sites, or dangers of unemployment resulting from the changes in the economic cycles could no longer be attributed to the nature. These societies also developed institutions and methods to cope with the dangers and risk in the form of insurance, compensation, safety, etc. The risk societies are characterized by increasing environmental degradation and environmental hazards. At the center lies the risk and consequences of modernization, which are revealed as irresistible threats to the life of plants, animals, and human beings. Unlike the factory-related or occupational hazards of 19th and first half of the 20th century, this can no longer be limited to certain localities or groups, but rather exhibit a tendency to globalization. In the face of environmental risk and hazards of a qualitatively different kind, both real and potential, earlier modes of coping with them also break down. Yet when large-scale disasters like Chernobyl occur, protests do break out which challenge the legitimacy of the state and other institutions that appear powerless to manage the problems. Giddens offers two explanations for the emergence of environmental politics as a response to the ecological threats that thus a politics mobilized by ideal values and moral imperatives. Ecological movements, he observed, compel us to confront those dimensions of modernity which have been hitherto neglected. Furthermore, they sanitize us of subtleties in the relations between nature and human beings that could otherwise remain unexplored. Habermas sees the ecology movement as a response of the life world to its colonialization, since they are the expression of the reification of the commutative order of the life world. Further economic development or technical improvements in the administrative apparatus of government cannot alleviate these tensions. For Habermas, capitalism is the primary cause of environmental degradation. All these social theories emphasize the need for democratization of state, power and civil societies. Giddens suggests that not just the impact but the very logic of unchecked scientific and technological development would have to be confronted if further harm is to be avoided. He argues that since the most consequential ecological issues are global, forms of interventions could necessarily have a global basis. New forms of local, national, and international democracy may emerge and form an essential component of any politics that seeks to transcend the threats of modernity. Habermas, while recognizing the limitations of modern state power, argues for the creation and defense of a public sphere where rational democratic discourse can occur. Beck argues for an ecological democracy as the central political response to the dangers of risk society. Reach agendas, development plans, and an introduction of new technologies must be made open for discussion, and at the same time legal and institutional controls on them must be made more effective. All the above scholars point to the limitations of the predominantly representative rather than participatory character of liberal democracy being an essential precondition for creating environmental sustainability. A sociological, social science perspective in the analysis of environmental issues is still emerging. Responding to the demands of social reality, sociologists are just beginning to explore the many dimensions of environmental problems of our times. The ecological environmental perspective open up an unexplored dimension of some of the important areas of sociological concern. As powerful critic of the modernization or development agenda, this perspective brings out the unsustainability of the project. The industrial capitalist mode of production and consumption destroys the very resource base necessary for its existence, but even more threatens human's life itself. With the growth of ecological politics and movements, a new area of sociological inquiry has opened up, which transcends the conventional dichotomy of the right and the left politics that cut across class divisions and even national boundaries, and creates spaces for activism within the social society using the popular initiative. In a fundamental sense, it calls for a redefinition of the relations between human beings and their natural environment and a reconsideration of the effect of human action upon nature. 13.4 Consequences of development on ecology and environment. The tremendous impact of human ecology is well manifested in the life support system, including air, water, land, and energy. As the human population grows, there appears imbalance of food production and crisis of space, leading to environmental pollution and which unfavorably alter our surroundings. Survival in such crisis circumstances call for an expansion or movement to a different place, and distribution and destruction of the natural forest for human existence and comfort. These human activities in due course lead to all sort of unfavorable alteration of our environment, which is now a worldwide concern. These human activities are discussed here. A. Water pollution. The major sources of water pollution are: 1. Industrial effluents, wastes or toxic byproducts. Sewage waste. This contains decomposable organic matter and a pathogenic agents directly discharged into rivers, streams, lakes, etc. Third, agriculture pollutants. There are excessive agricultural nutrients such as fertilizers, disease controlling chemicals like pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. These pollutants damage not only human beings but plants and animals alike. However, compared to the other two, industrial effluents cause much greater pollution. B. Air pollution and noise. These sources are: 1. Industrial manufacturing process, steel, chemical plants, oil refineries, fertilizers factories, etc. Second, combustion, industrial and domestic combustion of coal, oil, forest fires, etc. through smoke, dust, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, etc. Third, automobiles. These emit carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, suspended particulate matter. Fourth, miscellaneous agricultural activities such as crop spraying for the pest control, nuclear energy programs, etc. Fifth, radiation pollution. For example, the one happened in Chernobyl or gas tragedy in Bhopal. Here too, the omission of gas from industrial and manufacturing and in radiation cause of greatest pollution. C. Soil pollution. First is solid fallout from explosion of nuclear devices. Second, agricultural activities over application of inorganic manure and different chemical-based pesticides. D. Destruction of forest. Large-scale deforestation lead to flood, soil erosion, silting of rivers, contraction of agricultural areas, and desertification. We see more deforestations through forest contractors than from local villagers who use the wood as a fuel. All these types of pollution affect human health directly or indirectly through environment, other flora and fauna, recreational amenities, and productivity. Reflections and action 13.2. Half of the world's population already lives in cities, and the pace of urbanization continues to accelerate. Most of the world's mega cities with over 8 million inhabitants are in the developing world. How do we make urbanization more sustainable? Can we avoid problems such as air and water pollution, loss of farmlands, and isolation from nature? What are the major ecological challenges human society are facing today? 13.5 Ecological movements and survival. The contemporary period is characterized by the emergence of ecology movements in all parts of the world, which are attempting to redesign the pattern and extents of natural resources utilizations to ensure social equality and ecological sustainability. Ecology movements are emerging from conflicts over natural resources, and the people's rights to survival are spreading in regions like the Indian subcontinent, where most natural resources are already being utilized to fulfill the basic survival needs of large majority of the people. The introduction of resource and energy intensive production technologies under such conditions led to the economic growth for a small minority, while at the same time undermines the material basis for the survival of the large majority. In this way, ecology movements have questioned the validity of the domain concept and the indicators of development. Third world economy ecology movements, which resist the restriction of caused by the state managed market development, are challenging the concept of politics and the economies are defined within the narrow confines of market. They reveal that there is a notion of democracy which is wider and deeper than the market democracy. This is the ecological concept of democracy of all life based on the recognition of the right to life of a non-human nature and all segments of human society, including those large numbers which do not and cannot produce and consume within the market and who are treated as dispensable in the logic of the market. The third world economy movements highlight the way in which issues of ecology and equity, sustainability and justice are intimately linked to one another. The intensity and range of ecology movement in independent India have continuously widened as a predatory exploitation of natural resources to feed the process of development had increased in extent and intensity. This process have been characterized by the massive expansion of energy and resource intensive industrial activity and major development projects like large dams, forest exploitation, mining and energy intensive agriculture. Among the various ecology movements in India, the Chipko movement, Embrace the Trees to Oppose Felling, is the most well known. It began as a movement of the hill people of the state of UP to save the forest resources for exploitation by contractors from outside. It later evolved into an ecological movement that was aimed at the maintenance of ecological sustainability of major upland watersheds in India. A spontaneous people's response to save vital forest resources was seen in Jharkhand area, the one in Bihar Orissa border region, as well as Basandar areas of Madhya Pradesh, where there were attempts to convert the mixed natural forest into plantations of commercial tree species, to the complete detriment of the tribal people. Inspired by the Chipko movement, Epico movement in the Himalayas is actively involved in stopping illegal overfelling of tree forest and in replanting forest lands with multi-purpose broad-leaved tree species. In the Aravalli hills of Rajasthan, there has been a massive program of tree planting to give employment to those hands which were hitherto engaged in felling of trees. The exploitation of mineral resources, in particular the open cast mining in the sensitive watersheds of the Himalayas, the Western Ghats and Central India, have also resulted in a great deal of environmental damage. As a consequence, environmental movements have come up in these regions to oppose the reckless mining operation. Most successful among them is the movement against the limestone quarrying in Doon Valley. Large river valley projects which are coming up in India at a very rapid pace is another group of development projects against which people have organized ecology movement. The large scale submersion of forest and agricultural land and prerequisites for large river valley project always takes a heavy toll of dense forest and best food growing lands. These have usually been the material basis for survival of large number of people in India, especially tribal people. The ecological movements against the Tehri High Dam in UP and Himalaya exposes the possible threat to people living in both above and below the dam site through large-scale destabilization of land by seepage and strong seismic movements that could be induced by impoundment. 13.6 Development Project as Ecological Concerns. In this section, we shall present a few projects that have been widely discussed in recent years as threat to ecology and environment in India. A Tehri hydroelectrical project. The controversial Tehri Dam is a classical example of the wanton destruction of the Himalayan geosystem and ecology wrought by the demands of development. The idea of setting up a high dam in the lesser Himalayas to harness its power and water potential was conceived way back in 1949, and a site chosen on River Bhagirathi, 1.5 kilometer downstream from the 1,000-year-old holy town of Tehri, 1,550 meters above sea level. Serious doubts were raised about the viability and location of Tehri Dam. Tehri Dam is located in the central Himalayan seismic gap where the Indian plate is crashing into the Asian mainland at a speed of 2 centimeters per year. The geological disturbance being created by the constructions of the dam may hasten and intensify the earthquake. The rocks lining the walls of Bhagirathi Gorge are prone to seepage, and our accumulating water may exert immense pressure on the hilltops. This, along with the constantly eroding shale of the riverbed, will weaken the dam foundation, which is said to be lying on a fault. Further, Tehri Dam will obstruct the natural flow of massive volume of sediments, raising the riverbeds upstreams and endangering the populous settlements. It will be inundate several villages and displace its inhabitants who has been living there for generations. More precious land in this already dented land had to be cleared for those ousted, compelling them to surrender their fertile fields in return for barren patches. The rehabilitation scheme ignored the village as the unit for relocation and settlement them as individual families, thus taking away their collective bargaining power and destroying community culture. People in Gadwal, Himalaya have been against the project, and their opposition coalesced into a movement. A fresh review of the project and closer scrutiny of the dam construction is being done. Narmada River Valley Project. The Narmada River Valley Project, the largest in the country, envisages construction of 30 major dams, 10 on Narmada and 20 in tributaries, as well as 135 medium and 300 minor dams. Of these, the two mega dams are the Sardar Sarovar and Narmada Sagar. Some 21 million people dwell in this enormous basin, covering 98,796 square kilometer. Around 80% of the population, with a sizable number of tribals, lives in villages and are dependent on agriculture and forest. Narmada Sagar and Sardar Sarovar dams were to be built in tandem, but the former, estimated to submerge 90,000, was and thus never got underway, being enmeshed in controversy from its inception. Construction of the latter, however, was taken up with zeal at the instance of Gujarat government. People affected diversely from the project are numerous and ever increasing. Hundreds of villages needed to be evicted for the project, resulting in the villages and tribal beings displaced and disposed. Their traditional sources of livelihood are lost, and rehabilitation does not necessarily recreate the same. The farmer of the Nimar thrive or horticulture, and when moved out of fertile plains, where will they grow their flowers? It has been contended widely that there will be serious ecological consequences as a result of the building of these dams. Massive waterlogging and increased salinity of the soil would compound the problem. Activists such as Medha Patkar and several others have drawn attention to these negative impacts on the environment. Protests in the form of strikes and indefinite fasts have emerged. Construction of Sardar Sarovar Dam has been stalled due to several anomalies which have been found in the project report of the government. Bhopal gas leak. The Bhopal gas disaster, unparalleled in Indian history, reveals the mindless exploitation of developing countries by the multinationals for profit. Union Carbide plant set up for pesticide formulation expanded despite posing environmental hazard. The plant's safety system was not up to the mark, which caused the lethal leak, and deadly chemicals were released in the atmosphere. The mushroom cloud, which dissipated over the area of 40 square kilometer in Bhopal city, led its toxic over the people, the poor being affected largely. Hundreds died while others suffers from the chronic disease as a result of toxics even today. Bhopal genocide is only a link in the chain of lethal pesticides and chemicals being developed by big industries and multinationals in their search for profit. It is the third world countries where they dump hazardous products and experiment with deadly chemicals. Cities and towns, especially the congested localities inhabited by the poor, are the potential powder kegs ready to ignite the drop of a match. International dealers of pesticides, agrochemicals, and petrochemicals, batteries, synthetic flyers are swarming in, which, without safety precautions and mindless exploitation, poses a threat to environment. The Chilika Shrimp Farm. Chilika, situated in Orissa, is the largest brackish water lake in India. It is a protected bird sanctuary, provides sustenance to thousands of farmers and fisher flock, and had innumerable species of fish and marine life. Aquatic plants thrive in this unique ecosystem, making it an ideal sprawling ground for shrimps. Its natural propensity to breed prawns make it blue water irresistible to big business houses. Integrated shrimp farming project in the backwaters of Chilika has been conceived by some corporate agents. When the project gets approved underway, a part of Chilika will be enclosed by a 13-kilometer embankment to form a artificial lake. It will then be parceled into small ponds which will be filled up with seawater or fresh water as and when required. To breed 250 to 300 gram shrimp in 30 to 40 days as proposed in the project, protein-rich feed, chemical fertilizers and pesticides will be pumped into the waters. The poisonous effluents will be dumped into the creek joining Chilka with the sea. The natural ebb and flow of Chilka is set to lose its rhythm with the ISFP embankment, which will disclose the fish route. Chemicals and pesticides will destroy the spawning grounds and the pumps will scare away the birds. Cattle will not be able to gaze on the new grass on the islands springing up in the arid seasons. There will be waterlogging, salinity, and consequently ecological balance will be disturbed. Reflections and Action 13.3 discuss the dilemma of development. What kind of development would be equitable and sustainable? 13.7 Internationalisation of environmental concerns. With the increased internationalization of environmental concern, Linton Cladwell 1990 notes that the doctrines and the dogmas of alienable national sovereignty are being modified de facto to accommodate the imperatives of the International Environmental Corporation. In his opinion, nations need to lose their cultural identity and integrity by cooperating with other nations in the matters of common necessity. Indeed, international environmental policy have been directed to the protect and restoring the cultural and ecological distinctiveness of nations. The question is not merely the linkages between international environmental corporation and the national identity and sovereignty. Other perceives an increasing tendency of the contentions and debates on ecological issues at the global level of significant matters of sustainable development. The deliberations of sustainable development in various international fora conferences recently were compelled to deal with the questions of the North-South divide and hierarchy. Wide-ranging differences persist due to variety of issues like causes of global environmental degradations to the mechanism of arresting ecological crisis. While some perceive underdevelopment of third world countries itself as a major cause of environmental damage. Many advocates from these countries argue that the very process of development along the lines of industrial progress has been instrumental in unleashing a global ecological crisis. Third world spokespersons in international environmental negotiations demand that the industrialized countries of the North should subsidize efforts of replacing environmentally polluting industries of the South. Responsibilities for global environmental crises like ozone layer depletion, greenhouse effect, etc., are still contentious issues between the North and the South. A critical international ecological perspective demands not only an argue to create newer and wider international environmental regimes to tackle specific problems, but also a commitment to transformatory politics which address global unequal power relation. The challenges to the nation state system emanating from various quarters provide an ambivalent realm of perspectives. From an ecological angle, environmental activities and theoreticians conventionally argue that since the state is an embodiment of coercive power and an instrument of accumulation of resource, it has to be replaced by a local self-governing entities and ecologically sustainable communities. The accelerated onslaught of globalization forces on local and national lives of people and their environment pose new challenges to the development of a contemporary critical ecological perspective. In the changing global context, local communities find it extremely difficult to stop the plundering of their natural resource endowment by transnational corporations and agencies. Ecology movements, while realizing their own weakness due to their dissipated nature and the challenging character of the nation state, are faced with the take of critically rethinking the linkages between micropolitics of movements and micropolitics of the national state and international affairs. Reinventing civil society and the state in new democratic way is being proposed as the inevitable alternative routes. The international perspective on ecology and sustainable development envisages transformatory politics challenging the existing process of accumulation and hierarchies of power from local to global realms. This politics of transformation envisions a sustainability of nature and resources through the development of struggles to the challenge forces which exploit human and nature, such as perspective looks for meaningful and organic democratic local global linkages with a bottom-up approach. 13.8 Participatory approach for the management of natural resources. Different conceptions and debates on environmental development connection by conservationists, developmentalists, women activists, tribals, and other marginalized groups reveals that each one has a different position or emphasis on issues such as conservation, subsistence needs of the poor, particularly women, economic growth, models of sustainability of critical resources, threats to ecosystems, and issues of equity and distribution of costs and benefits in the management of natural resources. The focus on the environment development connection has reframed the issues of control and management of natural resources as it reflects the demand of global economy, which are pitted against the people's claim to traditional rights and their livelihood. As political and economic battles intensify, livelihood interest and the commercial interests are locked in never-ending contradictions and may not be easily reconciled. Over the years, various approaches for natural resource management have been outlined, both formal and informal arrangements to support participatory process on the grounds of efficiency, involving local people and building a partnership between the state and the community through appropriate institutional arrangements. Within the agenda of decentralized management of natural resource, one can identify several institutional arrangements such as self-initiated user groups, formal community groups established through government initiatives, joint forest management and watershed management, and institutions of local self-government, Panchayati Raj institution. These local institutional arrangements shape the choices, priorities, and bargaining system to change state-community dynamics. Community management of local resources or a decentralized strategy has assumed importance as it is expected to protect livelihoods and lead to more sustainable management of resources. Another argument often made in defense of community management of natural resources relates to the indigenous women's knowledge system, which are embedded in a particular community or context. Shiva argues Third World women, tribal and peasants act as intellectual genie pools of ecological categories of thought and action. Women's responses to environmental issues are mediated by their livelihood systems, division of labor, and unequal access to productive resource and knowledge and information. Local NGOs have tried to build alternatives for the management of the local resource base and link issues of gender equity to issues of social justice, poverty, and indigenous people's rights. The arguments for social justice and local people's rights are based on the premise that local communities have a greater stake in the sustainable use of resources and are better positioned to respond and adapt to specific social and ecological conditions and incorporate local interest and preference. They are also conversant with the local ecological practices and process and can manage the resources through traditional forms of access and management. During the last 2 decades, natural resource management and biodiversity conservation have emerged as major priorities within countries and among donor agencies. People-oriented rhetoric and community-based natural resource management have become part of a strategy for bringing nations into line with global resource management initiatives. Reflections and Action 13.4. Drastic change in lifestyles and attitudes are essential for a sustainable tomorrow. Discuss. 13.9 Conclusion. The boundaries of environmental concerns are fast disappearing. Local global linkages in economical perspectives and movements are becoming more pronounced. While different sections of peoples and communities all over are raising issues of environmental and survival through movements, nation states are engaged in international deliberations and conferences for developing international protocols and creating international environmental regimes. A new meaningful attempt at grasping ecological politics of our times have to understand and respond to the emerging conflictual and consensual dynamics within and between the local global parameters. Sustainable development is a conceptual and policy arena where contestations on a variety of local global factors occur. There is a need to decipher proper ecological perspective in more concrete terms. This unit delineates the interrelationship between ecology, environment, and development. It analyzes how the question of ecology and environment are addressed in social theory. We understood most responses to the environmental crisis will remain at the best superficial and palliative unless there is a universal recognition that our species is an integral part of nature, that we must recognize that latest limits. This understanding, as well as a lack of it, has profound implications for the kind of future society and polity that need to be established. It also has profound implications for arenas as diverse as the content and direction of ideology, development, technical choices, and a consumer freedom. The unit also make an attempt to look into the mammoth proportions of the environmental crisis caused by the development practices presently adopted, and we understood the urgency of the need to find solutions to this crisis pose tremendous challenges to develop coherent, rational, and ecological perspective. Finally, an alternative paradigm for the management of resources also have been explored in this unit. 13.10 Further reading. I. Munshi, 2000, Environment in Sociological Theory, Sociological Bulletin, Volume 29, Number 262. V. Shiva, 1991, Ecology and Politics of Survival. UNDP 2003 Human Development Report. This is the end of the Unit 13. Thank you very much.